Do you know what time it is? Time to talk about replacing the inner and outer tie rods on a car. Alright, so what is an inner and outer tie rod? Well, this is your inner tie rod, this is your outer tie rod. The inner tie rod connects to the steering rack, so the steering wheel will push or pull it. And the outer tie rod will connect to a steering knuckle, which will help help the car steering, the front wheels turn. Alright, so they can actually be adjusted inner or outer if you unscrew this and then twist like the inner or unscrew the outer to make them longer or shorter because they screw into each other, and then they're fastened tight, held tight with this nut. Well, if they get rusted together like my car was, they don't spin anymore, and then you can't do an alignment on the front wheels anymore. So that was the situation I was in. But fortunately, we can replace these, and it's not too expensive, unless you want to go OEM. So if you go to the dealer, this piece alone, the inner tie rod, is like $150, $125. This is like $58, and then you get another set. So I was able to, and then from Firestone, the entire job was like $550. I think, and then there were two Polish shops I checked out, and both quoted me at $400. So I looked online for how much the parts were, and I found some from TRQ that looked pretty good because I like the idea of having the castle nut and cotter pin. Just the cotter pin gives you extra security to make sure it doesn't pop off. And TRQ had them for $40, and that was really cool. The one thing that TRQ didn't have was the boot right here. It's like a plasticky rubber boot that has like a little clamp down here and then like a crimp up top and to the steering rack. And that's why this is all silver and this is all not. The boot was making this, kept this, and this is the original color. This is what it turned out to be a while later. And then it would crimp around this little indentation here. So, what do you need to do to uninstall your tie rods? Well, ideally, what you do first is behind your wheels right here. So what you have to do is I want to turn your wheel a little bit towards the opposite side. You have a little more room to work. And take your wheels off, elevate them, put them on stands. Don't use a ramp. So jack up your car and then put some stands underneath the front wheels. Then remove look behind the axle, and you'll see this connected to the steering knuckle. And the axle will be about 6 inches in front. Go ahead and remove that cotter pin. Go ahead and remove that castle nut. And then we're going to have to remove it from the steering knuckle. You do it with a hammer. So grab a hammer and go bang, 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 and it'll just hang like that. The next step, if you can, is to unscrew this nut here. So get in there. I think it's 18 millimeters on a Toyota Prius, I think. And just try to unscrew that. Now, if you're stuck in the we'll go with that. If it's 18 millimeters, you can unscrew it, and then you can just twist off the outer tie rod, leaving only the inner tie rod. However, I wasn't able to do that because they were rusted together. So I had to find another option. But we'll get to that first. So ideally, if you only have your inner tie rod left, what you do is you take this rentable tool, the inner tie rod remover tool. There's actually a couple. Find the right size that fits your car. So while this is connected to the steering rack, put that on there. And we're going to grab this tube. And you see out a little line. Put this over. Like that. And now we have to lock it. It's a little finicky. But we'll get it like that. Alright. Now what you can use is a breaker bar and lefty loosey. Push it and break it and it'll come out. However, we didn't really have that option on mine because they were rusted. So some other tools that are available just these like ball joint remover inner tie rod tools. In theory, they're supposed to just slide like this, and then you crank. But it depends on your car. My car didn't have enough space to use this. Maybe some trucks and SUVs do, but you can just slide this over and then like use a hammer and lefty loosey that out. But I couldn't use that, unfortunately. What I did have to do instead was, because it was all rusted together, take this tool. It's called, again, inner tie rod tool. About $20. You get it for like $13 on Amazon, $20 at a store. And then you can see the tooth marks, because you have to make it bite into here, otherwise it'll just slip. So you have to take it apart, put it in like that, and then just by brute force, tighten it. And you're gonna have to get like a wrench in there to get it tighter and tighter and tighter. And because there wasn't a lot of room to move in my smaller car, you're just stuck doing like 1/8 rotations and getting it tighter and tighter. But once it is like super tight, it's not budging anymore on both sides, then you can take an extension or adapter. This is a 1/2 inch, it's too big, so you'd have to get an adapter. But you take something like this, either a breaker bar or like an impact wrench, and stick that in there, and then just rotate. And the idea is to just rotate it like that. So you might have to use a hammer to rotate it, or just a lot of force. The impact wrench actually took 45 seconds of just boom, 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 boom before it finally got it loose to get it off. So this tool takes longer to use. Expect to spend like 3-4 minutes just tightening the bolts and the nuts. There's that, and that's what ended up working. So this was all off, this was working, and then what this has on it is a boot. So this boot, it's plastic, it goes around here, or rubber, has like a clamp here that you can just use the pliers to pinch, and then it has like a crimp up top. So you probably have to actually like remove the crimp to pull the boot down and slide it down here. Ideally you'd take it off before using the tool, but and if you can, and yeah, anyway, so remove the boot, and then I had to reuse it for about $10 more. I could have bought a kit that had new boots, but it wasn't necessary, and I didn't realize they sold them at the time when I bought them. But it would have saved me about 10 minutes if I would have gotten new boots. And the new boots may have had easier cramps than the ones that came with that were on it with this set. Anyway, so just something to think about. Anyway, so now you pull that boot off, or just slide it down, and then you're able to hand twist this entire set off. So what I had to do though is, because this is still one solid piece that had a boot on it, I had to take a hacksaw, and that's what hacksaw, and just hack this off, and that's how I was able to get the boot, because the boot was not going to slide over this small side was not going to slide over this, and I had to slide the boot off after I cut it. So first, before trying to hacksaw to cut it, I did try a pipe tubing cutter. Someone on YouTube had used a larger version of this and cut it that way, but it wasn't working despite tightening and rotating. The hacksaw was just way faster than trying to use that. We spent like 3-4 minutes doing this, and it did very minimal anything. So anyway, so everything's out, you have your boot free, awesome. So what we need to do now is find out where, like, get the right length. So hopefully you can figure out like where it was tightened. And if you didn't, you could perhaps you could measure earlier to try to match. So mine was like 11 turns approximately. Found that out by after I took this entire set out, put it up like that. I took my new set of new tie rods and made them match in height, and that's how I got my 11 for my Prius. And it'll probably be a different amount of turns for your car, but it's good to match the left and right because they may or may not be identical. Yeah, so after you've connected them and made sure your old tie rod and new tie rod are the same like height and length and everything, then unscrew the outer tie rod from the inner tie rod and memorize 1, 2, 3, and all the way out, and remember that number, and it might for each specific side to try to match the length for each specific side because it'll be smaller or shorter based on how many turns you have. So with that number in mind, we're going to install the new tie rod. So the new tie rod, we're going to use this tool because you can torque it more easily. The new tie rod, we're going to stick this into the steering rack, put that in again, put this tube on top. We're going to twist it down to 46 foot-pounds. I got that number from a Firestone Tech guy, and I also got the torque specs for this nut and this nut, which there aren't any. There's only a torque spec on the inner tie rod turning into the steering rack, and these are just like hand tightened pretty hard with like a small medium tool. So anyway, so once this is put in, you've tightened it to 46 foot-pounds. We have to put that old boot back on, or the new boot if you bought that kit. So slide that on, crimp it, and then slide it on and crimp it in that little area right here. So now your boot is on. This is good. Now we're going to put the outer tie rod in and twist it however many turns we remember from earlier. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Excellent. And got it up. Then we're going to put this back into the steering knuckle. You might have to rotate the tire a little bit. So move the tire and then push it through the steering knuckle again. So once it's through the steering knuckle, we'll put the castle nut back on. I reused my original castle nuts just because they had a wider base. And after it's screwed in far enough, you're going to have to tighten it pretty hard. But get to a spot where you can actually see through there so you can put your cotter pin in. This is just an extra assurance that it won't pop out and you won't lose your steering ability, because if this pops out, your tire can spin any way it wants to. And then if you want to, you can curve one of these back for more security. Though, before putting the boot on, you will need to put some grease in this area. So if we were going to do that, just throw some grease in here. So with the 1A Auto with the TRQ, it does come with the grease. We'll just kind of put that in there. We'll just smear it. Push it up far back around that ball joint. So it pivots. You can kind of see that. Put a little bit more in there. And it's going to be covered by the this boot here. So it shouldn't get a lot of stuff in there. You probably want a little bit more than that. You don't want to see like that white space too much. And then on both this old one and the TRQ. Oh, okay. Sorry. For this old one, it spins really freely. See how? Look at that. For the new one, it doesn't spin freely easily. Only after I connected it was I able to use it as like a lever to kind of pull it around. This one moves pretty freely. So some may say it's designed to be free. Others may say it's too free. You can tell you have a worn one. I'm not sure of the actual answer. I've seen new ones that are like pretty free, and old ones, both new ones that are both free and new ones that are both also hard to pivot here. These you don't need to use the grease on. at least with the ones that came with mine, because they were pre-greased. This one still has quite a bit of grease, around it. Nothing, yeah. So it still has a lot of grease, but it is rusted shut. So you have this installed. You have the boot installed. Or you grease it up, then you put the boot on, you twist this in the proper amount of times, put the cast nut and this in, and should be set. So then you get to do the next side. So I hope these things, you don't want to get caught up without using your grease, putting it in here. There are some places that you'll also need to grease, or use like a grease gun. Put it in here. These in TRQs were sealed, so lower maintenance. Some other mechanics like to use, for Moog. Moog has, it's another aftermarket brand. They have a place for a grease gun, so you can put new grease in, during every other oil change or whatever you want. But a lot of manufacturers are going through, because when people started going to longer intervals between oil change, they started going through parts that could be go through longer durations between being needed to be serviced. So that's why the sealed ones started to come up. So people may make the claim that a sealed one may have a shorter overall length of time, so maybe 100,000 miles, but with no maintenance. But a one that you can grease, if it's never greased, it might only last 30,000. But if it's always greased, maybe it's 150,000, maybe 200,000. So I just got the sealed ones because they were only $40, and it's already, my car's already got a lot of miles on it. So, and they're so cheap, I don't mind replacing them. And I don't even know if the mechanics are going to grease them up during the oil changes. And I don't have a grease gun yet. So that's why I went for the sealed ones. So I hope this has been informative. I hope you learned something. And I hope this helps you with your project.